call the Federal Way City Council to order for purposes of executive session pursuant to RCW 4230-1404B. We'll be in recess until 5:30 for that purpose. And that's collective bargaining. Good evening. I'll call the special meeting of the Federal Way City Council to order for our special meeting. We are back from our executive session, and now it's time for a study session. Port of Seattle Sustainable Airport Master Plan. We'll have our Chief of Staff, Brian Wilson, do the introductions. Sir?
Mayor, Council, citizens, it's my pleasure to introduce Elizabeth Levitt, who is the Senior Director of Environmental and Sustainability for the Port of Seattle. She is part of the CEO's senior management team, and she's here to present information on the Sustainable Airport Master Plan. So my pleasure to introduce Director Levitt.
Good evening, council members and citizens. So I'm here to brief you today on the airport Sustainable Airport Master Plan, and I'm not familiar with how your study sessions work, but please feel free to interrupt me at any time if you've got a question. Sometimes it's easier to take it in the context of the slide I've got up there, so please feel free. And I want to thank you very much for having me here. We've really been working hard to try to get out and engage the community as much as possible around the master plan, and certainly engaging with Federal Way is an important touch point for us. So as many of you know, the airport has been facing some fairly dramatic growth in the last couple of years. In 2014, we closed out the year at 37.5 million annual passengers and 340,000 flight operations. One operation is a takeoff and a landing. That was up 7.7 and 7.3% from the prior year. 2015, we grew by another almost 12 or 13%, topping out the year at 42.3 million passengers and 381,000 operations. And so far, month over month, what we've been seeing this year is a fairly similar 11 to 12% growth rate over the prior year. So we're really struggling with what we can do to continue to meet the region's air transportation needs, which is the job that the citizens of the state of Washington have put on the Port of Seattle. So there's some good news in this. The airport is certainly a major economic engine for the region. We are responsible for $220 million in retail and service sales, and 170,000 jobs are related to airport activity. 32,000 of those are actually directly on-site related jobs, and the rest are really jobs that are follow on from the direct activity there. We really are working hard on 4 projects that are currently either in the final stages of design, in construction, or construction has been completed to meet this immediate growth. The first is an expansion of our North Satellite. Alaska Airlines was looking for us to create more gates for them at the North Satellite, but also to brand that North Satellite to be part of an Alaska customer experience. So we're getting ready to start construction on that important project, and I think when it opens, you'll see a whole new facility out there that's going to be vibrant and new and really reflect the new design opportunities that you see at airports today. We're also in the middle of design and will soon begin breaking ground on the first stages of a new international arrivals facility. The photograph you see in the bottom corner there is an artist's depiction of what the facility will look like, and this facility will replace the existing Federal Inspection Service facility in the South Satellite today when you can come in on an international arriving flight. And that facility is grossly undersized given the number of international passengers we have today. And we work day after day after day to try to do what we can to move those passengers through the facility as quickly as possible, but ultimately it's going to require a much larger facility to accommodate our international growth. And we're really looking for something that welcomes visitors to the Pacific Northwest and embodies the spirit of the Northwest. So I think you'll be pleased at the design of the new facility. It's both of those projects are slated to be LEED Silver, Leadership in Energy and Environment Design facilities. So we're happy that the Port Commission is really standing behind their commitment to sustainable construction. And then thirdly, we've been in the second year of reconstructing the center runway. That job should close off this year sometime. And then another project that you won't likely see is a reconstruction of the entire baggage system underneath the airport ticketing level. There's about 10 or 11 miles of baggage conveyor belts down there, and we want to get that facility far more efficient so that we can move your bags as quickly as we can from the ticket counters into your gates and aircraft. So one of the first things that you do when you start an airport master plan is to actually do what we call an airport activity forecast. So similar to what you would do as city folks, understanding what the population growth in your area is going to be, we ask ourselves the same question. What sort of demand will the region request of SeaTac over the next 20 years? And we do that really in heavy reliance on the Puget Sound Regional Council's forecast for the regional growth, because a lot of airport growth is directly related to the regional growth and the economic vitality of the region that we serve. And this particular forecast for our master plan shows that we may get to 66 million passengers by 2034 and up to 540,000 aircraft operations by 2034. I always like to note at this point that the 540,000 operations is the same number of operations we have forecasted in prior master plans. What's different now is that the airlines are flying larger aircraft and filling more of the seats, as I'm sure anybody who's flown recently has experienced, so that we're able to actually carry what used to be 45 million passengers and 540,000 operations. We're now up to 66 million passengers with the same number of takeoff and landing. So this is an unconstrained forecast, and it's really our job on the master plan team right now to understand what sort of facilities will we need to meet that regional demand. Can we get 66 million passengers through the airport, and if so, what will that take? So I talked earlier about the fact that we have really been in an unprecedented growth period for the last couple of years, and this slide really just illustrates that we have already exceeded a large amount of the growth that we thought we were going to see in the first 5 years of the master plan in the first 2.5 years. So you can see we're up 12.5% just in 2015 alone, and that really doubles down the need for port staff to really do what we can to try to provide facilities in time to be able to keep the airport operating as efficiently as possible. That said, through consultation with Puget Sound Regional Council, the PSRC believes that while we are in a period of pretty big economic growth right now regionally, that'll likely come back and by 2024-ish hit the line where everyone thought we were going to be at that point. So right now we think this is unprecedented growth. We don't expect to continue to grow at this rate, but forecasts are forecasts, so we'll see how that actually pans out. So master plans are really large, big picture scale master planning or planning sort of functions. So this isn't one of those things where we figure out all the details and actually get to design. This really is a larger scale, sort of a massing diagram. What are we going to need? Where can we place it on the airport property? How do we meet all the different functions that we need to meet? And it's a campus-wide comprehensive plan over the next 20 years. And then we'll break that down into 5-year increments and say, by 2024, we need the following, by 2029, 2034, as we make it through the forecast period. Right now, what we're doing is really analyzing alternatives within a major development concept that I'll show you here in a little bit. Our goal is by later on this fall to get to a preferred alternative so that we can then take that preferred alternative into the environmental review period, where we'll be actively engaged with the public to identify areas of environmental concern and then go through the National Environmental Policy Act and State Environmental Policy Act processes. So this is all balanced to the capacity of the 3-runway system. The Port of Seattle Commission made the commitment when we started this master plan. Nobody was talking about a 4th runway. And so just wanted to make sure that that's clear to everybody. We're looking at the capacity that we can get out of SeaTac with the 3 runways we have today. And then ultimately, we have to come back with an understanding of what is it going to cost to build these facilities, how would you phase them in over time, and therefore what are the capital program needs that we're going to look look to the commission to help us with, and what sort of plan of finance might we have. So we're about partway through the process, and hopefully by later on, early this fall, mid-fall, we'll really be moving into environmental review. So what does 66 million passengers and 540,000 operations mean? And what I'm going to talk about a little bit is what it really means during a peak period. This isn't every day of the year. For us, a peak period is a July or August busy day. So basically where we are today on a busy day at SeaTac Airport is 88 operations an hour. And with this forecast, we anticipate that on a peak period in August, we could be up to 120 operations in an hour, which really means that we've got to figure out a way to move aircraft from the airfield to the gates and back far more efficiently, and really think about how we, well, maximize the efficiency of the airfield, basically. From a terminal perspective, we'll be adding 8 additional gates to the North Satellite, as I discussed earlier. We're still going to need 35 additional gates by 2034 to be able to meet this forecast. And we're going to need to figure out how we build the aircraft hold rooms, the security checkpoints, the ticket counter capacity, and then things like concessions and places at your gate where you can pick up amenities to be able to service that number of people. And we're also asking ourselves the question whether we can actually move 66 million people through the existing terminal we have today, and we think the answer is that no, we would not be able to. And if so, where would we build a second terminal? And then, of course, on the land side, we've got some work to do to make the roadways capable of handling that many folks, and also spend some time with our partners in public transit to see what we can do to get people out of their cars and into public transit to access the airport to help alleviate some of the congestion that we see there. So we're also trying to understand if we build a second terminal, how would we build a roadway network that serves it, and we can talk a little bit more about that later. So that's what it means in a peak period. So the challenge is even more underscored by the fact that we have a very constrained footprint at SeaTac. So north, south, east, and west, we are hemmed in by something, either existing highways, future highways like the extension of 509. We have wetlands and wetland mitigation sites south, west, and north of the airport that we're going to have to work around. And then, of course, International Boulevard and a cemetery on the east. So if you look at the colors on this map, the yellow area in the center is the area that we believe in the future we're going to need for aircraft gates. The area that's yellow with the cross-hatched, those are places we're going to need for aircraft gates that currently have other functions located on them. So we're going to have to relocate the existing functions before we can bring gates on. The area to the far right or north, that's sort of the brownish red color, is the area we believe we're going to need for the cargo that we're anticipating that we'll be carrying by 2034. And the areas in blue, both within the red boundary and then to the north, are properties that we have where we could potentially relocate the functions that currently fall under the area we're going to need for gates. So you can see we've got a challenge, and we're going to have to be very careful that we put all these puzzle pieces in the right place so that we have a no regrets option moving forward. So concept 4 is the concept that the Port of Seattle Commission has told us that we need to proceed with and sort of understand options around. So concept 4 basically has us, is there a pointer here someplace? It's okay if it's not handy, I'll use my words. So concept 4 basically has us getting our 35 additional gates in a couple of ways. The first thing we would be doing is converting Concourse B to an international wide-body accessible gate so that those people can then process through the International Arrivals Facility. I talked about it at the start of my discussion. And then to the north, we would extend Concourse D, which is to the right. Oh, there you go. You're so smart. Extend Concourse D to the right and then come north and build these piers to the north. It might be 3 piers, it might be a different configuration. We're still really working on those details. Under this cloud, you'll see this blue facility here. This is actually the location for a potential second terminal, which if you're familiar with the Doug Fox parking lot, this terminal would be located in that lot. It would be a place where you could drop off your passengers, pick up your passengers, basically an entire facility, check-in, security, bag claim, and then a passenger would walk across a bridge that would go over the freeway into this North Pier concept. To the north, we would have our cargo operation, and then these are areas that are worth noting. So these grayish boxes with aircraft located in them. One of the things we've learned is that we're going to need a place where we can pull aircraft off a gate while they're waiting to take off, and or the opposite, if somebody lands and there's not a gate available, where they could go temporarily and be held prior to going either to the gate or to the runway. So one of the things we've determined that we need are these aircraft hold pads, and those would be located both on the south end of the airport and on the north end of the airport. So this would be the cargo operation, aircraft hold pads. These would be gates. And then down to the south, again, we've got aircraft hold pads. So underneath these hold pads and these facilities up here are a number of cargo functions, aircraft maintenance hangars, and other things that we believe at this point we're going to need to relocate to this area called SASA, the South Aviation Support Area. Councilmember Honda?
Thank you. How long do you anticipate holding airplanes before they could get to a gate?
That's what we're actually trying to figure out right now. We don't know the answer to that question, but what we're doing right now that we have a development concept and we know where the gates might go, we're doing airfield simulation modeling, and that airfield simulation modeling will help us understand when we need the hold pads and how long an aircraft might be held on them. But at this point, we don't believe we need those aircraft hold pads until out into the future, somewhere between 2029 and 2034. So it won't be something we need to rush out and build tomorrow, we don't think. But
Okay. Because that's very frustrating when you're going to miss your next flight because you're sitting out on the tarmac.
absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you.
One of the other things we anticipate is the airport gets busier throughout the day. The airlines are likely going to start moving flights into some of the quieter periods, because that'll be better for them and for their customers long term. So anyway, what we've identified really is the need to proceed with the South Aviation Support Area, what we call SASA. And SASA would basically be an aircraft accessible bridge that would take you over to this platform that we would build in the area that used to be called the Tyee Golf Course. And there we would relocate potentially aircraft maintenance hangars, potentially a part of the cargo operation. There might be places there to park aircraft overnight because we have such a large push in the morning here in Seattle. So this is the major concept that we're now working on various alternatives within, with the hopes of getting to a preferred alternative by sometime this fall. So I talked earlier about the need for a second terminal. So part of what we're trying to figure out is how long can we live within the terminal we have. And as a general rule of thumb, if we build a second terminal, we could take 30% of our passengers that are currently going through the existing terminal and peel them off into this new north terminal. And interestingly enough, 70% of 66 million passengers is roughly the number that we're accommodating in the existing terminal today. And I think if you've seen the existing terminal today, during a peak period, that's a good sense that that's probably about all we're really going to get out of it. And technology is helpful, but a body and a suitcase still take up the same amount of space no matter what technology they're carrying. So we're looking at a whole bunch of factors to help us understand when we might need it. What's the cost? Certainly we want to be careful that we're not building facilities today to meet this dramatic growth. If something changes in the next 5 or 10 years and all of a sudden we're not growing at that rate, we don't want to have overbuilt. So we're looking at the risk. What happens if we grow slower? What happens if we grow faster? How can we build flexibility in? And then we're spending a lot of time really thinking about development. How do you phase these improvements in? How constructible will they be? What sort of environmental standards do we need to build to? And then what's the level of service for our customers going to be both during construction and after construction? The other thing I'd like to touch briefly on is the roadside congestion that we experience today. So I'm sure if any of you have landed on a Sunday night or picked up somebody, a family member or a friend who's traveling in on a Sunday night, it's severely congested out there. And we sometimes have backups on the airport drive that can go all the way to the FAA Air Traffic Control Tower and sometimes beyond. So we're focused on a couple of different things in the near term and the midterm to try to alleviate the problem. The first is really managing the way people use the curbside. So people in Seattle like to sit on the curb longer and wait for their passengers to come. And so we've now hired some non-uniformed police folks that will be out there really trying to manage the airport drive and keep folks moving. Certainly the cell phone lot has been helpful for that. You might come to the airport someday and be dropping off or picking up an Alaska passenger, and we might be asking you to go to the middle of the terminal where you wouldn't normally be for an Alaska passenger, so we can spread that load out. We're also looking at some potential fixes for this drive approach area where we'd like to try to get a couple more lanes built into there, potentially one for the rental car facility buses so that we can get them out of the traffic. Potentially another one that would allow folks who decide they don't want to wait in traffic to go directly into the garage. And that could also potentially include some of the hotel shuttles and parking shuttles. So that's a midterm project that we're really diving deep into now. And then ultimately, we're going to have to solve the problem of how we get people out of the airport and headed north. And all of these problems will be easier to solve if we build a second terminal and 30% of the traffic isn't on the airport drive. So this is really the first airport master plan in the country that has really integrated sustainability from the very beginning of the plan. So most airport master plans, they finish and then they tack a chapter on the end to talk about how they're going to be greener, about how they go about doing it. So we made the commitment early on that we were really going to build on the partnerships that we've had with our airline partners, our business partners, and folks in the region to try to really take that to the next step. So we've been working a long time with the airlines to get preconditioned air and electric ground support equipment that helps reduce emissions and noise on the airfield. We've made a commitment to renewable natural gas that includes not only our buses, but the taxi fleet that serves the airport. And you may have seen that recently we started letting the TNCs, the transportation network companies like Uber and Lyft, come to the airport. The commission required them to have green vehicles too. We've also been doing a lot of work in terms of energy conservation and energy efficiency, upgrading the facilities we have. And then all of the water that falls on the airport actually gets treated and detained before it gets released to local creeks. So one of the things I'm most proud of is that we were the first airport in North America to get accredited from the Airport Carbon Accreditation Program, which is a worldwide program that rolled out in Europe and Asia probably 5 or 6 years ago and has finally come to the US. And what this says is that an external body certifies that the airport is not only measuring our carbon emissions, but that we're actively working with our business partners to reduce those. So what we're doing in terms of integrating sustainability into the master plan, we started off working with port staff and with the commission to identify a series of sustainability goals that the commission wanted us to focus on, which we call the Strategy for a Sustainable SeaTac, or S3. And then we struggled for a while. So how do you fit this into a master plan? How do you make this all blend? How do you really integrate this into the fabric of what we do? And as with lots of new things, you overthink something and it gets really complicated and technical, and suddenly you realize you need to pull back and simplify it. So what we ended up doing at the end was really thinking about this in 3 buckets. You know, you can be sustainable if you think about building the most efficient airport you can build. So that's all about what and where we build. you can be sustainable by thinking about how you build, what level of green standards or LEED standards might you be building your facilities to. But at the end of the day, with the kind of growth that we're anticipating, we really have to also focus on how we operate. So at the end of this master plan, we'll be coming back to the commission saying, based on what we're going to build and how we think you're going to want to build it, these are the environmental impacts we think we're going to have. These are the emissions we're projecting. And if you want to meet these sustainability goals, we are going to have to get very aggressive on our operational initiatives to try to close that gap as much as we can. So the other thing we've been doing is really spending a lot of time, especially with our local fence line cities, to do what we can to bring economic development opportunities from this airport growth into their communities. So we've got some work going on with Burien and SeaTac in Des Moines and other cities to really look for potential economic opportunities for them, and to potentially think about whether some of those functions that are located on the airport could actually be located off airport and increase local cities' tax bases. So we've got an economic development team that has been fairly active, and we look forward to that continued engagement. So next steps, we're going to continue trying to understand the capacity of the airfield and understand what we can do to make it as efficient as possible. We're going to be refining layouts for where we place these gates, the second terminal, the roadway network that serves the second terminal. And then we need to start thinking about some of the other lower level facilities. Where does the fire station go? Where does the police evidence room go? Where do flight kitchens and catering places go as we work our way to the environmental review? And then, of course, we're really continuing with the community engagement that we've been active with and will continue to be active with as we get into environmental. And then here's our schedule. We've got, we'll hopefully get to a preferred alternative and have our plan of finance together by the end of the third quarter of this year. As we get into environmental review, we anticipate that's going to go into 2017 with the goal that by the end of 2017, we've got FAA's approval of our plans and can proceed. Just a couple of slides on public outreach. So we are now getting close to starting our third series of public outreach. So we've been into South End cities, we've been to the east side, we've been to downtown Seattle, first in the second quarter of 2015 and then again in March. Like I said, we're going to be starting our third series here in the next couple of months. We've also really been actively engaged with local forums. We've got a transportation review committee of folks involved in the region's transportation planning so that we can think together about how we can solve our mutual problems. We're really trying to get in, with targeted audiences, whether it's chambers or others. And then, of course, we've done a lot of work with local city councils such as yours. And then also a lot of work with FAA and TSA and CBP and some of the federal agencies. So a lot of ongoing participation. Just an example of some of the ways we've been communicating with folks and really trying to get the word out with folks. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions. I've got Marco Milanese here if we need his help.
Councilmember Hunt and then Councilmember Duclos.
Thank you, and thank you for coming tonight and sharing this information with us. I don't know if you know, but we've had some community meetings here in this room about the noise and the impact from the airport. And with the airport growing as it will, how will the airport work with the cities like ours that aren't right next door to the airport on these issues?
Well, the first thing that we'll be doing as part of the environmental is actually reanalyzing what the noise contours associated with the growth that we're anticipating might be. So we will work with FAA to do the noise modeling necessary to understand what the noise contours are and therefore who would be in or out of the noise mitigation boundaries that FAA imposes. And then I think through the public engagement that we've done, we're going to continue to need to talk to cities about the increased air traffic and what that might mean for them. And I think you probably heard from the port heretofore that we don't have any control over who comes and goes from the airport or the routes that they fly. That's totally within FAA's control, but we view ourselves as an important player in the conversation with FAA to make sure that the voices that need to be heard are heard.
Councilmember Duclos.
Well, mine was the same question, really, so I'll just do a little follow-up on that. I appreciate, and when I moved here in 1990, SeaTac was like this. Now it's like this. But the noise factor is something for our residents, especially during the middle of the night. And I think since this is growing so much and so much traffic is coming in, it really deserves to look at the noise factor and working together with the cities on trying to mitigate some of that. When you're woken at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning because planes are going over constantly and they're very loud because we're in the glide path for them to come down or take off, citizens don't get too happy with that. So that's something that I would appreciate I would appreciate seeing the port looking at that issue.
Thank you. I'll take that back. I know the commission is very interested in us remaining engaged, and I know that it's an issue of frustration for residents, and I think it's hard for us because there's nothing we can directly do to say, no, you need to move that plane. But we do view ourselves as an important part of the conversation. So,
Thank you. Councilmember Sefadowson.
Mine was also the same question.
That beat you to the punch.
Yeah. However, I do have another question also. You're projecting 66% growth in 2030 of passenger growth.
mm-hmm.
With this technology, where a lot of it is now happening on Skype or FaceTime or however people conduct businesses, I wonder if that is still going to continue to rise in terms of business travels, or what you predict.
It's a really interesting question, and while our forecast doesn't necessarily look into every potential little thing that might affect air travel, what it does is it looks back 20 years and asks the question, what are the significant factors that influenced airport growth over the last 20 years? And for each airport, it's different, especially for Seattle, where 70% of the people that come to Seattle intend to either come here or leave from here. So what our forecast did was look at the biggest indicators of growth looking forward, and then use the Puget Sound Regional Council's data around those indicators to project future growth. So the lines that we show go like this, reality does this, and somewhere in that variation is your question. So I can't answer your question specifically. I suspect that it may have some impact, but there's still a lot of people that are looking for that face-to-face connection when they do business, and doing that in person. So I believe, as a general rule, our forecast will take care of that, and I'd probably be remiss if I didn't note that we will certainly be monitoring actual growth as we go. If we're growing faster, we're going to need to make accommodation for that. If we grow slower, we'll certainly be slowing down our capital program. We only want to build the facilities we need when we need them. We don't want to be, burdening the airlines with debt for facilities that we don't need. So,
Council, any other questions? Deputy Mayor Burbridge.
Thank you. And thank you, Elizabeth, for your presentation. It's a great deal of important information for us, and I do share the concerns about the noise we've experienced, and certainly I've experienced, my family, in the more than 45 years we've lived in this area, the changes in the flight patterns and the concomitant changes in noise. And even though some of the flights are thankfully more quiet, it's been interesting to find that the noise levels have increased in certain areas, and we've heard some very, very passionate concerns expressed by our residents. And I know you mentioned emissions too, and that's can be a serious concern as well. But I also am wondering, and I'm assuming here, but I'm wondering if you have any comment on the financing of these improvements, and I'm sure that there's a lot of due diligence being done, but I'm wondering if you have any comments on.
well, right now what we're really trying to do is get some master plan level cost estimation done on the project. So, I can tell you it's likely going to be more than $10 billion worth of improvements over the 20-year period, but that's a really gross a gross estimate at this point. So over the next couple of months, what we'll be doing is master plan level cost estimating, and then we will look to our finance and budget department and likely our bond counsel to help us understand. And that's when somebody else will be coming up here talking to you guys, not me, because it's not my area of expertise. But we'll look to understand, what are the capital program needs, what are the bond implications, and then ultimately that all translates to cost per employment. What do the airlines get charged for use of our facility, and how does that get passed on in ticket prices to people that fly? So that's work that's ahead, and it will not be an easy lift.
Thank you.
Director Levitt, can you tell us about, I see the environmental review, I'm looking deep into your, this calendar that you have for 15, 16, and 17. The environmental review, which started in the fourth quarter of 2015, and I see it goes through the second quarter of 2017. What are the next steps in the environmental review, and does the environmental review take in consideration the impact that additional aircraft noise and volume will have on its neighboring jurisdictions?
It absolutely will. So the reason you see that line started is in 2016 is because that's how long it takes the port to procure a consultant. So we actually have a consultant underway, Landerman Brown, who you guys may be familiar with. They did the Part 150 study and has some unique experience really in this region to help us. They are getting started on their first tasks right now, helping us get background information together. Sometime this fall, what we'll do is actually start the scoping process, where we'll be out in the community inviting community members and councils to give us a sense of what environmental topics you believe we should be including in the environmental review. Certainly noise and emissions and other things will be amongst that, effect on water. So anyway, there's a list of like 23 category areas that one generally covers in the NEPA and SEPA, the National Environmental and State Environmental Policy Acts. But we'll be out in the communities asking for input on what areas we think should be covered. Then the environmental review consultant will actually start doing some analysis. There'll be public hearings public meetings where we give the community an opportunity to interact with us as we go through the environmental review. And then ultimately, it's up to FAA to approve our National Environmental Policy Act document. And once that's approved, when that gets approved, then the FAA would basically give us approval to move forward with the master plan projects. Likely what we would do is get unconditional approval to do projects in the first 5 or 10 years, and then the further out year projects, we would wait and come back later once we had a better idea of timing of need and whatnot.
So is it the FAA that reviews the NEPA-SEPA, or what body reviews
Both.
the NEPA-SEPA?
Yeah, so FAA has primacy over the National Environmental Policy Act. Now, to the extent that streams or wetlands become involved, the Corps of Engineers also would have a role in that. And then the Port of Seattle Commission actually has authority under the State Environmental Policy Act. We're our own lead agency. And so it would be the Port Commission who would make decisions on the SEPA. But ultimately, without FAA's approval of the NEPA document, nothing's going to happen.
And as referenced, last November, we had a very large, packed, this room is packed. And we actually televised it locally, and the FAA and the airport folks were here, and it was, we really appreciated their time and their expertise, and it was a good opportunity for the community to interact and hear some of this information. We are actually in the process of putting together, just so you know, and I'm sure my chief of staff informed you that we are in the process of putting together an airport noise coalition or task force. And so, we'll probably want some interaction and feedback and make sure that you're aware of what kind of input we're needing and want.
Yeah, we would absolutely want to help you in any way we can with technical information for your committee or liaising with FAA, and certainly would think that the comments or the output from the committee would be an important part of our scoping process. That'd be great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Director Levitt. All right. Council, any other questions?
Thank
All right.
you.
Thank you. Great job.
Really appreciate the opportunity.
All right. Thank you. Well, we've got 2 pink sheets for members of the community that are present. We have Bill Bruff, who we'll call Mr. Bill Bruff, who is present. If you'd like to come up to the podium. And then we've got Ernest Thompson. Anybody else? If anybody else would like to address the audience, please fill out a form.
Hi, I'm Bill Bruff, and hello, council members and citizens. 120 operations per hour. They're very proud of that. That's one every 30 seconds over my house. What that's going to result in is sleepless nights, interrupted conversations, and much lower property values. My neighbor tried to sell his house, and the real estate person came up with clients, and one of the airplanes flew over, and they turned around and left, and I heard the client saying, "I'm not even interested in seeing the house." And I don't blame them. They're going to do noise monitoring. I've got a simple answer for that. Rather than the studies that they're going to do for noise monitoring, if you can't hear your next door neighbor talking to you, if you're awakened during the night, that's probably loud enough. If the chief of the FAA would not allow us to make the same amount of noise in front of his house without calling the police and calling us a public nuisance, that's too loud. I don't need more monitors. We have noise monitoring. They've been doing that since I can remember, and I've been here 40 years. I've given you a handout. I don't know if the council members have that handout.
We do, Bill.
This is down, by the way. That's the current flight path, the green line. I defy you to show me a way you could take an airplane off of that airport and fly over more people than you currently are. There is not a way to do that. In the north end, they have two flight procedures, one during the day and one during the night. Can I ask you why there's two different ones?
Bill, maybe go ahead and ask the question, and when you're done, go ahead and, because you're on a timer.
Okay.
So we'll turn that question.
Well,
Go
I'll
ahead.
tell you why, because the north end gets more interest than the south end does. The blue line that I have on there is my proposed route. Folks, if we're going to reduce airplane noise, there is only one way, and that's to fly the airplanes over the water. That's what they do for the north end as much as possible. They come within about a half a mile or less while flying down the coastline. Whoops.
Go ahead.
Okay, a half a mile or less. And I'm thinking if they turned off earlier, they would fly over far fewer people. They could take that blue line and add all those buildings that are talking about, storage, warehouses, all the non-noise impacted area, and just buy out those people. That's all there is to it. They said they can't go north, they can't go east, they can't go west, so they're going to go south. So if they go south and follow that blue line, buy that area out, I think they'll actually make money. Do I have to quit?
Do you have any concluding, maybe kind of a wrap-up? Did you have any brief thoughts, maybe kind of a wrap-up statement?
Well, just 120 flights per hour every 30 seconds. Think about that, every 30 seconds. And the idea is to get bigger. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I'm not picking on you. I'm not.
All right. Thanks, Bill. All right, we're going to, Ernest Thompson is next, and then Mr. Bruff posed a question, and maybe we can see if we can get some comment on that. Ernest, go ahead.
My name is Ernest Thompson. I'm speaking in a private capacity, although I do happen to be on the Planning Commission of Normandy Park, as well as their Finance Committee. I would like to ask just a couple of quick questions because I could talk about this for hours. Obviously, we're not doing that. There were mitigations that were signed during the Citizens Against SeaTac expansion years ago. And one of those was that the Port of Seattle would be looking into building alternative airports. And that was agreed to, the mitigation. It was part of the multiple lawsuits, as I'm sure some of you people remember, against them, and the tremendous amount of money and time that was spent. And I would like to ask you, what have you done to find alternative airport sites, such as, for example, as were proposed at that time to build a brand-new airport in Moses Lake and a bullet train in, which turned out, according to engineers' analysis, would be faster with a bullet train than driving down I-5. And I would like to know what you've done.
Ernest, what we'll do is.
Okay, we'll ask the same
I've written
thing.
down the questions, they've heard
Okay.
it. So do you have anything else you'd like to address? Doug?
Yes, the other thing is when you talk about environmental sustainability, I would also like to know how many trees they're planning to cut down, not only adjacent to the airport, on airport land, but also how many trees, large trees, conifers, irreplaceable trees, they're planning to cut down in Burien and Des Moines on private property. Supposedly this is for FAA regulations, and yet at the same time these cities are trying to restore salmon runs and have made a diligent attempt to do that, and this will not only increase the noise levels, it will also increase the pollution in those creeks and deter any positive effects those people will have. I believe they can't even decide on the number. They said 1,800, then they said 2,800. That's a forest. The real answer here is with the noise, which is endless and increasing and destroying property values and everything else. And now in an incredibly crowded urban area, the real answer is to build a new airport completely out of the urban area. And I suspect that, I'm concluding here, that the real reason they really don't want to do that is because it would be out of King County, and then they would lose authority and someone else would have power. And the last thought I have on that is that the airport, in providing jobs, basically provides consistently underwhelming wages, which leads to increased poverty. They are not a friend of the working class. And I think South King County, including you folks, should seriously consider with other cities here breaking King County in two, because none of these flights go over Bellevue or Medina, where the money's at. Thank you.
Thank you, Ernest. What we'll do as soon as we've got one more pink sheet. In fact, Diana Noble-Gulliford has submitted a pink sheet. Or is that for the regular meeting or for right now? Oh, come on up, Diana. And then Ernest and Bill, as soon as this is done, we'll ask Director Levitt about some of these questions.
Well, good evening, Mayor and Council. I wasn't planning on testifying. However, I find it odd that the presenter this evening is talking about the FAA as the determining factor in the flights and how they take off. And I think the construction, however, it's great to see. It's an example of if we build it, they will come. What we're talking about is airport flights, an increase. My experience in real estate is that you cannot mitigate airplane noise in residential areas and in schools. You can do the windows, you can do the fireplaces, and apply a lot of construction techniques so that inside the homes it may be quiet, but if you're outside, you cannot talk to your neighbor. I agree with what Mr. Bruff has said, and I think part of sustainability also has to be the environment, the living environment to the people that are in Federal Way. We're talking about noise and we're talking about air pollution. We're also talking about an economic impact and where the balance is. I welcome the jobs. I welcome the opportunity that perhaps there is some economic benefit to Federal Way and our city for new businesses to locate here. But I think overall, we're talking about quality of life in our city. And sustainability is not just for trees, it is not just for the water. It's also an economic sustainability as well as environmental for the people that live and work here. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Diana. All right, Director Levitt, we just had a couple of questions, and can we ask a couple of questions? Just in follow-up. So there appears to be kind of an overall pattern. We heard this a lot during the November meeting, and it's a recurrent theme about what appears to be a bias toward south end takeoffs and south end arrivals as well, in favor of or less than the northern approach or the northern takeoff. Any comment on that, or any your knowledge of that?
I would just reiterate what I said before. This is really FAA's bailiwick more than it is the port's. So we did put a greener skies procedure in over the northern part of Seattle, where when the conditions are right into the future, based on the technology, they'll be able to come in over Elliott Bay and then down the Duwamish. I don't think that necessarily means that there's always a commensurate reduction in noise complaints. There are certainly people on Beacon Hill that feel similarly to the way folks on Federal Way do. You're right on the arrival path, and given where the runways are situated, there's really no way of avoiding some of that. So, I have not been involved with the FAA on all the procedure work they do, so I can't really speak to the comment that the gentleman had about north end versus south end. But
Okay, and we're going to address that, and that'll be one of the topics that we talk about in the Airport Noise Coalition and Task Force. What about the second speaker, Mr. Thompson, talked about mitigations and alternative airports, and I did remember hearing some discussion about that. Was there any consideration to looking at another site before greatly expanding this one?
I actually appreciate some follow-up with Mr. Thompson to understand what he is referring to. So when the region was going through the decision about whether we built a third runway at SeaTac or whether we went ahead and built another airport, Puget Sound Regional Council led a region-wide effort to make that decision. And as part of the Puget Sound Regional Council's decision, they determined that it did make sense to build a third runway at SeaTac, and to build an airport someplace else didn't make sense for the region, and the economics weren't right. The permits that we got to build the third runway did not include a commitment that the port go out and try to site another airport or to do a bullet train study. So I really appreciate seeing Mr. Thompson's document that he shared. I was the one that got the permits to build the third runway. I'm very familiar with what's in them. So there was work to look at potential other airport sites, Moses Lake, JBLM, Payne Field, but that was prior to the actual permitting of the third runway.
Okay, so you guys will connect after that, and let us know how that. Please let us know how that conversation goes. Mr. Thompson also asked about the number of trees.
Yeah, I'm going to let Marco take that. I'm not intimately involved in the obstruction removal program. I can tell you that what happens is when trees grow up to a height, or buildings get built to a height where they may become a hazard for navigation, FAA requires that they be removed. Obstruction removal is what they're called. You want to?
We've identified about.
Please. That way we've got it. We're rolling. The camera's rolling, so it helps.
Marco Milanese in Public Affairs at the port. And we have identified 2,800 trees around the airport that break that safety plane of that extends from the runways. And so beginning later this year, we'll begin a process for the removal of those trees, but there's an environmental process attached to that whole SEPA process. But none of those trees are, the trees that we will be identified for removal are way outside of the city of Federal Way. They're much closer into the airport communities.
Right, okay.
And then there'll also be a program to replace the trees. We're looking for trees that aren't going to grow as tall as the ones that are there today, so we don't have to turn around and do this again in 15 or 20 years. But it's an ongoing safety project that FAA requires.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Director Levitt. Council, any follow-up questions? Councilmember Honda?
When trees are removed from, are they removed from private property, and does an owner have any part of the discussion?
Marco?
Yeah, a small percentage are on private property, and that will be there will be discussions with those property owners to figure out what they can be replaced with, and what the mitigation in terms of what the compensation that might be involved with that is still something we're trying to figure out. But yeah, there are a small portion of the trees on residential properties around the airport.
Thank you.
All right, Council, any other questions? All right, to our speakers, thank you very much. And Director Levitt, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And your team, appreciate it. Okay, hearing, council, any other comments on this for the good of the order before we adjourn this special meeting? All right, hearing none, we are adjourned, but before we adjourn, actually, I need to excuse Councilmember Maloney for this meeting and for the next. She is ill this evening and notified us previously, so we send her our best. She is excused, and we are adjourned.